It started with a single sentence, quiet, sharp, and impossible to ignore. At the height of one of television's most beloved westerns, a man known for his calm presence and steady authority once described a co-star in a way that stunned those who later heard it. Not difficult, not challenging, not even unpleasant, but something far more severe. Something that hinted at a tension so deep it had been carefully hidden for years. And that's where the Rayall story begins. Because what audiences saw on screen was one of the most composed, believable, and emotionally grounded relationships in television history. But behind the cameras, behind the carefully delivered lines and subtle glances, there was something else entirely, something far more complicated. To understand how it all unfolded, you have to go back to the very beginning, long before the cameras ever started rolling. Before it became a television phenomenon, the story lived in a completely different world. One without visuals, without sets, and without faces. It began on radio in 1952, at a time when families gathered not around televisions but around speakers. The show emerged as something different. It wasn't just another Western filled with gunfights and clear-cut heroes. It was slower, heavier, more thoughtful. Instead of simple good versus evil storytelling, it explored moral gray areas. Decisions had consequences. Characters faced situations that didn't always have clean endings. And that realism made it stand out immediately. At the center of it all was a voice, deep, controlled, and commanding. That voice gave life to a character who would soon become iconic. Without ever being seen, the lawman at the heart of the story felt real, grounded, and trustworthy. Listeners didn't just hear him. They believed in him. That belief became the foundation of the show's success. But success on radio created a new opportunity, one that would change everything. By the mid-1950s, television was rapidly becoming the dominant form of entertainment. Networks were eager to bring proven stories to this new visual medium, and the show seemed like a perfect candidate. But there was a problem. What worked on radio didn't automatically translate to television. On radio, imagination filled in the gaps. A voice could carry an entire character. But on television, appearance mattered just as much, sometimes more. The network faced a difficult decision. The man who had defined the role through voice alone had already shaped the character in the minds of millions. Replacing him risked losing everything that made the show work. Yet, the producers believed that television required something different, someone who could physically embody the role in a way that matched audience expectations. It was a gamble, and it led to one of the most surprising casting decisions in television history. At one point, the role was offered to one of the biggest names in Western films, a man whose presence alone could carry an entire production. It seemed like a perfect fit, but he turned it down. The reason wasn't complicated. Television demanded time, lots of it. A weekly series meant commitment, consistency, and a schedule that would leave little room for anything else. For someone already deeply established in film, it simply didn't make sense. Still, he saw potential in the project, enough potential that he made a suggestion. He recommended someone else. At the time, that recommendation wasn't an obvious choice. The actor wasn't yet a major star. He didn't carry the same level of recognition. But he had something else, something harder to define, but impossible to ignore. Presence. He was tall, quiet, controlled, and there was a seriousness about him that fit the role perfectly. When he stepped into the character, he didn't try to imitate what had come before. He built something new, something grounded in restraint rather than force. And slowly, audiences accepted him. Then they embraced him. Then they couldn't imagine anyone else in the role. What began as a risky decision became the foundation of one of the longest-running and most respected series in television history. But what viewers didn't know was that the man behind that performance carried something with him, something that would shape not only his portrayal, but also his relationships behind the scenes. Long before the fame, before the cameras, before the recognition, he had lived through something far more intense. War. Serving in one of the most dangerous campaigns of World War II, he experienced conditions that few could truly understand. It wasn't just the chaos or the fear, it was the physical toll. In one brutal moment, everything changed. A burst of enemy fire left him severely wounded. The injuries weren't temporary. They didn't fade with time. They stayed, quietly, persistently, and often painfully. Recovery was long, difficult, and incomplete. Even years later, long after the war had ended, the damage remained. Walking could be painful. Standing for long periods could become exhausting. And on a demanding television set, where long hours were the norm, those limitations mattered. But he didn't talk about it. He didn't complain. He simply adapted. Directors adjusted schedules. Scenes were planned carefully. Movements were minimized when possible. All of it done quietly, without drawing attention. And somehow it worked. On screen, audiences saw strength, calm authority, control. They didn't see the pain behind it. But that pain didn't just affect his physical performance. Over time, it began to influence something else: his patience, his energy, and the way he interacted with others, especially one person in particular. As the show grew, it wasn't just one character carrying it forward. A full ensemble came together, each bringing something unique. There was the experienced doctor, blunt but wise; the loyal deputy, gentle and dependable; later, a tougher replacement who brought a different kind of energy; and, at the center of it all, a woman who would become one of the most important figures in the entire series. She wasn't just a supporting character. She was something more. Confident, independent, strong in a way that stood out in a genre often dominated by male characters. She quickly became a fan favorite. Her character added emotional depth, balance, humanity, and, most importantly, she shared a connection with the central figure of the show that audiences couldn't ignore. From the very beginning, there was something between them. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't rely on grand gestures or obvious declarations. It was quiet. A look, a pause, a conversation that said more than the words themselves. They cared about each other. That much was clear. But the show never fully defined what that meant. They weren't officially together, but they weren't just friends either. And that uncertainty became one of the most compelling parts of the series. Viewers kept watching, not just for the stories, but for the possibility that something might finally change. But it never did. Not completely. And that wasn't by accident. Writers understood the power of restraint. By holding back, by keeping the relationship unresolved, they created a tension that lasted for years. Every episode added just enough to keep interest alive, without ever providing a final answer. It was a delicate balance, one that worked perfectly on screen. But behind the scenes, that same relationship was far more complicated. To the audience, their connection felt natural, effortless, real. But off camera, things were different. At first, the distance between them wasn't obvious. Both were professionals, focused, dedicated to their roles. But over time, small differences began to grow. They didn't socialize much. Conversations were often limited to what was necessary. There was respect, but not closeness. And slowly, that gap became more noticeable. It wasn't one dramatic incident that caused it. It was something quieter, more gradual. Different personalities, different working styles, different expectations. And eventually, those differences turned into tension. As the show continued, both actors became deeply connected to their characters. They understood them, believed in them, and had strong opinions about where those characters should go. That's where things became complicated. He preferred consistency, stability, a focus on the core identity of the show. To him, the character was a lawman first. Personal life came second. She saw something else. Opportunity. After years of subtle storytelling, she believed the relationship deserved to evolve, to become clearer, more emotionally defined. From her perspective, the audience had earned that development. From his, it risked changing what made the show work. Neither was entirely wrong, but neither was willing to fully give in either. And so tension grew. Writers found themselves caught in the middle. Some episodes leaned one way, others leaned another. The result was a constant push and pull, one that affected not just the story, but the atmosphere on set. Beyond creative disagreements, there was something even more fundamental at play: who they were as people. He was private, reserved, focused. When he wasn't working, he often kept to himself. Quiet moments mattered to him. Space mattered. She was the opposite: outgoing, social, energized by connection. She believed that building relationships off-screen could strengthen what happened on screen. Neither approach was wrong, but they didn't match, and when two people spend long hours together under pressure, those differences don't stay small. They grow. A conversation that didn't happen, a moment that felt misunderstood, a reaction that seemed colder than intended. Each one added up, until eventually, the distance between them wasn't just noticeable. It was unavoidable. As the show became more popular, attention shifted. What started as a single central figure expanded into something broader. Other characters gained importance. Stories became more layered. And with that, recognition began to spread. Her role grew. Her presence became more central. Audiences connected with her in a deeper way. With that came more visibility, more interviews, more features, more attention. For a show that had long been centered around one figure, this shift changed the dynamic. Even if it wasn't openly discussed, it was felt. In long-running productions, changes in attention can quietly reshape relationships. They can create tension where none existed before. And in this case, it added another layer to an already complicated situation. Producing a show of that scale wasn't easy. Long hours, tight schedules, dozens of episodes each year. It was demanding for everyone. But for someone already dealing with constant physical pain, it was even harder. Fatigue built up. Patience wore thin. Small frustrations became harder to ignore. And when you combine physical discomfort with creative disagreements and personality differences, the result isn't explosive. It's gradual, a slow build of tension that never fully disappears. After nearly 2 decades, a decision was made, not out of conflict, not out of drama, but out of a desire for something different. A step away from the demands of the show, a move toward a quieter life. Her departure marked the end of an era. The dynamic that had defined so much of the series changed. The unresolved relationship remained unresolved. And in a way, that was fitting, because just like the tension behind the scenes, not everything in this story had a clean ending. For viewers, the show remained a classic, a piece of television history defined by strong storytelling, memorable characters, and a sense of realism that set it apart. What they saw was connection, trust, chemistry. What they didn't see was everything that made it possible. The differences, the disagreements, the quiet distance between two people who, despite everything, created something unforgettable together. And maybe that's what makes the story so compelling. Not just what happened on screen, but what it took to make it happen at all. Because sometimes the most believable performances come not from perfect harmony, but from two people finding a way to work together, even when harmony doesn't exist. And that, more than anything, is what makes this story worth telling.